From annoying judging criteria that make the outcome of fights too uncertain, to improper gloves being used that can lead to some serious eye damage, there are tons of rules in the UFC that fans are pretty tired of and want them to be altered. Starting off with the weigh-in system. It's no surprise that this is a thing that many people are taking issue with lately, and for good reason. The current method used for weigh-ins is incredibly dangerous, and honestly, that's putting it lightly. In many cases, you'll see these fighters go to great lengths to meet their target weight, and this often involves a fair amount of cutting in a short time period. No surprise, this is a pretty dangerous practice and has often given many fighters a free trip to the hospital. Because of this, people even think that this is the biggest issue facing the UFC nowadays. And I can't help but agree. Some fighters will have to lose as much as 30 pounds before their fights, and to do this, they have to completely alter their diet. Many of them aren't even allowed to drink water. All the while, they have to keep training because, of course, they have to prepare for the fights too.
There's the choke. He's got it. It's under the neck. There it is. Nope, it's on the chin.
There's the tap. Still undisputed. Khabib Nurmagomedov.
It's just a terrible practice that leads to a lot of issues for the fighters. The main reason why it's still even a thing is because fixing it is a bit difficult. There have been a couple of ideas thrown around and discussed over the years, but still, a proper solution that everyone can agree on is still not happening, mostly because of how variable and wonky the human body can be sometimes. But that's far from the only issue that exists in the UFC nowadays, because there's also the whole issue regarding the gloves that are used in fights.
We're working off of that jab early. Knocked down for Oliveira now. Now a knee to the body for Charles and a right hand. Chandler retrieves it. Now Chandler is down. Charles Oliveira.
It seems like these gloves can really lead to some seriously critical damage in some cases.
Prove that he belongs in these big spots against the sport's best. Oh,
another pull.
Oh, it was a poke in the eye.
yeah.
It wasn't a low blow as he landed the body kick.
Over there. Over there.
Okay, so
Over there.
You gotta see the
In fact, UFC still using them is honestly a shock to me. While there haven't been too many cases of fighters literally having their eyes gouged out because of them, it's still within the realm of possibility. In fact, eye pokes are a pretty common occurrence in the octagon. As long as these gloves are being used, the chances of an unintentional eye poke happening is present. Plus, things get all muddied up when unintentional eye pokes come into the mix. Some fighters tend to stretch their palm straight to get an idea of just how much distance there is between them and their opponent, and during this process, they may sometimes poke their opponents with their gloves. Some people, like Chuck Liddell, have even come under fire in the past for doing this, but it's just one of those things that's impossible to prove if it was done on purpose, so people tend to sweep it under the rug. It just goes to show that as long as the fundamental problem, if the gloves themselves aren't fixed, it's likely going to lead to some fighters being blindsided. Speaking of rules that are in dire need of changing, it's the judging system.
Has called a stop to this contest at 19 seconds of round number 2. Declaring the winner by TKO and
Anyone that's a fan of UFC can probably agree that this is a heated topic of debate. It's a discussion that has been ongoing for years, and even now draws a ton of criticism from fans and fighters alike, and I can't deny that it's all for a good reason. The thing is that the criteria the judges use to give scores to the fighters sometimes seem all over the place. Some fans even state that it doesn't even feel like the judges themselves have any clue of what they're looking for, and so many of them have been calling for changes to be brought to the 10-point must system. In any case, more transparency and clarity in the whole process is directly needed. Plus, fans think it'd be better to just replace the judges with people who actually know what's going on in the octagon. You know, like actual fighters. Having ex-MMA players take on the role of judges might be better for everyone involved, although it's going to be tough to find anyone that's willing to take on this role. After all, you're pretty much asking to get a ton of hate from fans if your judgment of a fight is deemed incorrect. And that's not all. This next rule is definitely something that needs to be looked at. I'm talking about the 12-6 elbow strike rule. So this is one rule that's just kind of there, and it's hard to really imagine why. The infamous 12-6 elbow is an attack that involves a fighter using their elbows to strike at the head of their opponent. You're not allowed to do this because it's said that it leads to some serious damage. But this is a pretty important key detail to note here. If you attack from a specific arc, then it's a-okay. Basically, you just can't do it vertically. Sort of weird, right? What makes it even more bizarre is that this rule has been in place since all the way back when the unified rules of the MMA were first first formed. Back then, it was decided that since this move has been used in brick-breaking demonstrations, it was a bit too dangerous to be allowed against other fighters, and so it's something that's still present. But is it really as dangerous as it's said to be? It's generally believed that it isn't. Unless you're going out of your way and completely lodging your elbow into your opponent's spine, you're not going to do any long-standing injuries to them with this move, which is why people think it's high time that the move was legalized. Plus, it's tough to talk about rules that need changing without mentioning this next thing. It's the scoring system and the debate around ground control.
Makhachev trying to set up a submission here, DC.
Yep, and you know, these guys do combat sambo their entire lives, you know, so if you present an opportunity to get a sub, it's over. He'll go get it. There it is. He's got the arm.
And there's the tap.
Another big finish for Islam.
This is something that Rafael Fiziev even talked about recently, so you know it's important. In the fight between Makhachev and Volkanovski,
Volkanovski heading him off on the pressure. Typical. Nice down.
Massive right hand.
And he hurts him.
Sits him down.
Rafael wasn't a fan of the way that Makhachev won the fourth round.
Unanimous decision, and still the undisputed UFC lightweight champion of the world.
Even though all he did the entire time was keep his opponent locked in a body triangle for a good portion of it.
Number one problem is stopped by the fence. You can't get the lock where he needs it because of the fence, and that's why Volkanovski's so frustrated.
I was about to say, he can't allow himself to get frustrated or to let this thunderous crowd.
The judges sided with Makhachev, but Rafael felt like all he was doing was stalling things out. He wasn't really dishing any real damage like he should have been, and in the end, his winning that round felt unearned.
Oh, that's how you time a takedown.
Yeah,
Amazing work. And not against the fence, and I can't stress enough.
The UFC fighter thinks that the way that these rounds are scored needs changing, and fans definitely seem to be on his side in all this. I mean, just because you manage to stall a round doesn't just hand you the win, right? Especially when you barely dish out any real damage to your opponent.
Kind of a stumble from Islam, but it doesn't matter. Hit the ground all the same.
Some overhand left to a trip for Volkanovski on that one. And he's really picking up the pace now.
That said, there's another rule that fans have wanted to get changed from the current UFC rule set, and that's how fouls and infractions are handled. Fans seem to think that fighters get away with a little too much while in the octagon, and that it's up to the referees to be a bit more cautious of everything that's going on. There are a couple of moves that aren't allowed in the UFC. Stuff like strikes to the groin is a no-go. Plus, you can't attack the back of someone's head either. But there are tons of cases where fighters will do something that feels like it should be illegal, and usually in some ways it probably is, but they still manage to get away with it. Or sometimes they get as much as a warning. The thing is that if pulling this off changes the course of a fight, then they definitely should get a more serious foul or infraction for it. And so there definitely needs to be some adjustment to how this is handled. But those are all of the main UFC rules that need to get changed immediately.